This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 52. Welcome to the 52nd episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. If you've been enjoying the show, I would love it if you take a moment to leave a rating and a review in iTunes. It helps the show to move up in rankings, and it also helps more people find it. And of course, I'd like to thank everyone who has stopped by and left reviews already. I read all of the reviews, and I really appreciate you taking the time to let me know how I'm doing. And if you enjoyed today's show, please stop by the show notes page and leave a comment. You'll find all the episodes at fertilityfriday.com/podcast. And you can also find me on Facebook at facebook.com/Fertility Fridays with an S, and on Twitter at Fertile Friday. And as many of you know, I've also recently created the Fertility Friday Facebook group. So if you're interested in learning more about fertility awareness and joining the conversation, just head over to fertilityfriday.com/community and you'll be redirected to the group. And today I'm really happy to welcome my guest, Kym Campbell, to the show. Kym is a musician, a surfer, a blogger, and podcaster who has been struggling with infertility for a number of years now. And I was really inspired when I came across her blog because of her willingness to share her experiences and her fertility challenges with the world to help other women who are also struggling with the same thing. And in today's show, Kym will be talking about her experiences with IVF and other reproductive technologies, as well as her PCOS diagnosis, what she has learned from these experiences, and also how she has managed to maintain hope and positivity throughout her fertility journey. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Kym.
Thanks for having me, Lisa. I'm excited to be on your show today.
I'm so glad to have you. And so I did give you a short intro, but maybe you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your own fertility journey.
Sure. Yep. So, so I'm actually originally from Seattle in the States, moved over to Australia about 15 years ago. So we were just talking earlier about how I have a bit of a hybrid accent, if some of you are wondering where I'm from. So I got married about 5 years ago, and I'm 34 now. I think it's quite good to mention age. I feel like sometimes that has a lot to do with how difficult it is with you getting pregnant. So I'm obviously not scared to tell my age and let people know when I first started trying. So when I was about 30 years old, my husband and I did start trying. I did have really irregular periods my whole entire life. And, I feel like this is something you've talked about on your show, but for me, the first thing that doctors did when I was about 13 years old was put me on the pill, because that was kind of the way to deal with irregular periods at that time. Now looking back, I think, I wish I would have kind of looked at maybe some more holistic ways of dealing with that, maybe looking at my diet. I had other issues. I had quite bad insomnia, and looking back now, I can see how some of that was interrelated with kind of my lifestyle and diet and nutrition. But anyway, so I had irregular periods for quite a long time, and I thought that it might be difficult to get pregnant. So we did start trying and had troubles for about 6 months. And I started actually immediately going and seeing a fertility specialist. So through that experience, I did about 6 rounds of Clomid, ovulation induction cycle, and 2 IVF cycles. And I'm just actually at the moment doing a frozen embryo transfer. So it's been quite a long journey. It's been 4 years in total, but I've learned a lot along the way. Yeah, so it's something I've always been quite open about. I feel like infertility isn't something to be ashamed about. It's not your fault. It's not my fault, and it's something that I like to be open about, not only just within my circle, but just online publicly as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I absolutely agree. And it's obviously, we talked a little bit about this before the show, before we started recording, but it's becoming just more and more common. It's just definitely more and more of a reality for a lot of women. So I love that you started by, saying it's not your fault. It's something that's really common.
Yes, absolutely. And I think a lot of people struggle with feelings of guilt. And I know that's something that I've struggled with over the last 4 years. But I guess it's frustrating because it's hard to process that it isn't your fault. It's a natural way to feel guilty that you've done something wrong. But I feel like the more open we are about talking about it, the more helpful that can be with myself and other people processing that it's not your fault, and it's something you shouldn't be ashamed of, and something that the more we talk about it openly, the more positive conversations we can have about the issue.
Absolutely. And I want to touch on something that you said as we kind of unpacked your story a little bit, kind of on the lines of intuition, because you had mentioned that you had kind of this inkling that something might be wrong because you had irregular periods, and you'd been on the pill. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you after you said that was, when you say irregular periods, maybe you could talk a little bit about what that actually looked like for you. So were they
Sure.
sporadic or
Yeah,
non-existent or?
almost non-existent actually. So I got my period when I was 12, my first period, and from then on, I think the next period I had was maybe 10 months later, and then it was I literally had no idea. It could be up to a year sometimes in between periods. And at first I kind of thought I was quite an active child, so I played basketball growing up, and I thought maybe because I never ate well. There wasn't much of a food culture in my house, so I would say what we ate wasn't fantastic. So now looking back, I can see that that probably had a lot to do with it. And through I guess it's hard to say for the about 10 years from age 16 to 26, because I was actually on the pill for the entire time. So through that time, it was obviously regular being on the pill. But once I went off of it when I was about 26, again, it went back to, I'd have a period after about 10 months, and then 2 months, and then 4 months. And then sometimes I would have it every 2 weeks. So it was very unpredictable.
Mm-hmm. Well, and those are the types of stories that make me want to do this podcast. That's the reason why I'm doing it, because
Yes.
obviously if you have because the word irregular period gets thrown around, but obviously if you have, one period 1 month, and then 10 months goes by and you have a next one, and 3 months goes by and you have a next one, and it never really resolves itself into more of a consistent menstruation cycle,
Yes.
then that's a sign. Obviously now, we all know that this is a sign of a hormonal imbalance, that something is wrong. And unfortunately, you and how many other hundreds of thousands or millions of women with similar symptoms, instead of being treated, this issue, whatever the issue was that you had, was obviously continuing to go on in the background.
Yes. Yep.
And
And the only answer was essentially, "Oh, go onto the pill, and then you'll have regular periods."
hmm. Well, and so you had so you had this kind of, intuition, kind of knowing that, maybe something is wrong here. And so how long did you and your husband actually try before you decided to seek out fertility assistance?
So we actually only tried for about 6 months before I thought, okay, you know what, we need to get help, because I wanted 3 kids. I've always wanted 3 kids, and I wanted to space them out. And I knew, 30 is, relatively still quite young to be trying, but I didn't want it to go on and on. And I knew something. I was just, yeah, I guess I had the intuition that something was wrong. And I thought, the sooner I can go in and start figuring out what's going on, the better. And I really like to encourage other people to do that as well. I feel like sometimes doctors don't take you seriously and can say, oh, go try for a year, try for a year and a half, and come back after that. But especially if you've got the intuition that something's wrong, don't be scared to go and try to seek help immediately. And now looking back, if I hadn't been continually pushing it with doctors, I think we would be a lot less farther along in our journey if I hadn't have done that.
Oh, okay. And at what point, like, I kind of want to know what your experience was like with your physicians, with fertility specialists, and I also want to know at what point you were actually diagnosed with PCOS.
Yep. So it was I've actually been quite a few through quite a few specialists, and again, that's kind of something I like to share on my blog is don't be, you don't settle. So the first person I saw was actually an endocrinologist, and that was before we even started trying. And she did some tests and basically didn't came back to me without any helpful information. So that I found that was quite frustrating. The next person that I went and saw was another endocrinologist, And that was when we had started trying. So that was about 6 months after starting to try. And he put me on Clomid. But the problem with putting me on Clomid is he just gave me the pill and just said, okay, go take the pills, try on these days and hopefully that'll work. But when I went and learned a bit more about the best way to do it, it was actually you need to be in with your specialist, having ultrasounds, and so you can actually pinpoint exactly when you're going to ovulate, especially I think when you have PCOS, because sometimes it can be a bit unpredictable. So after seeing that specialist one time, I actually went and saw another one.
Oh, okay. And just to pause a sec, for those who aren't
Yes.
familiar with what Clomid is, what is Clomid? What does it do to the body, and how does it help you get pregnant?
Yeah, so Clomid's essentially a pill that you take that, to make it in really simple terms, it makes you ovulate well and on time. So it's, and a lot of times that can be combined with metformin, which is can help with insulin resistance. So a lot of times women who are struggling with PCOS actually are also struggling with insulin resistance. So I think he didn't put me on metformin immediately, but I think that the second cycle that I did, I was also put onto metformin as well.
Okay. And then what was your experience like with Clomid? Because in the beginning you said that you had 6 rounds of Clomid.
I did, I did get pregnant on my second round of Clomid, uh, and it I guess so. There's kind of two different experiences. One is the mental side, and one is the physical side. So, it's quite funny. Someone emailed me recently and called. They said their secret name for Clomid was the devil drug
Oh
because it
no.
it makes you really crazy, which I thought was a little quite funny. So it was difficult. I think and I think some women react more to hormones than others. And I remember my husband being like, "Oh, I can't wait to get this over with." But as far as it did work quite well. So it did make me ovulate, and it made me ovulate on time, and I did successfully get pregnant on my second round. Uh, but unfortunately, that did end in a miscarriage. But I think for women with PCOS, it is a great first option because it can solve that problem of getting you to ovulate and knowing when you're ovulating, especially if you're monitored via ultrasound, because you can time it really well
Hmm.
about when exactly you are ovulating. So it was successful the second time, and after that, I did try another 4 rounds, and unfortunately, those weren't successful. So with Clomid, I think after 6 rounds, they don't want you to do anymore. It's the most successful the first couple times, and so if it doesn't work for you, the first, I would say 4 times, really, it's probably worth moving on to the next level, which for me was an ovulation induction cycle.
Okay. And what is ovulation induction?
So ovulation induction, it's quite similar to a IVF cycle for the beginning part, and the fact that you are taking shots, but it's a much lower dose, and it actually, you don't retrieve eggs, you don't do anything in a petri dish. You just, it's almost similar to the Clomid in the fact that you do just have sex in order to get pregnant. It's just that with ovulation induction, you're taking shots, you're doing that round of hormone injections, and I think it's much more precise, and it works better for Clomid. So it's better than Clomid. So it's kind of just that next step up. And we were actually successful on our first round of the ovulation induction cycle, and I did get pregnant, but unfortunately did miscarry again. So that was a bit devastating to once again get pregnant and unfortunately not be able to have that result in a birth. But it was good to know, obviously, that my problem wasn't getting pregnant. So at
Yeah.
least that wasn't part of it. I knew that under supervision and doing different types of hormones, that it was at least possible to get pregnant.
Well, so this process that we're talking about, this, so far, because of course there's more to your story. What was kind of the timeline between the 6 rounds of Clomid and pregnancy, miscarriage, and second pregnancy, miscarriage? How along what time did this take?
I
That's
think, I think that's a good question. It's kind of hard to remember back now, but I think maybe that was probably over almost 2 years, because in between miscarriages, I did take a break. and I almost took about a year break in between all of this as well, just to get healthier. So I ended up going and seeing a functional practitioner. If everyone out there doesn't know what that is, it's kind of I guess a integrative holistic doctor who looks at the root problem instead of just kind of giving you a pill to fix the symptoms. So she overhauled everything about what I was doing, my diet, made me have some lifestyle changes, checked my gut health. I found out I was allergic to all sorts of food, stopped eating gluten and dairy, and got on a very specific diet similar to a paleo diet, and started taking quite a few supplements as well to deal with vitamin deficiencies that I had. So I guess you wouldn't say that I was trying, every single month throughout those kind of, I think it was about 2 years, where I was doing the Clomid cycles and the ovulation induction. So I did take a break in between.
Well, because you have a conversation, you're listening to, if you're, listening to this episode, and in the space of 5 minutes, we're talking about all of these things, and that's a lot to go through. And so that's why I wanted to get a sense of the time frame, because we don't talk a lot about miscarriages in our culture. It's just for some reason, until you have one. My experience was like, because I had a miscarriage early on at one point, before I had my first son. And it was like after that, all of a sudden, people would talk about it. And so all of a sudden, oh, well, I had one too, and blah, blah, blah. But until you kind of go through that, you don't really, you think you kind of suffering in silence or something. Like, you don't really realize how common miscarriages are, and also how painful and traumatic they can be.
Absolutely. That it's funny that you say that, because that was my exact experience as well. As all these people that I had no idea had miscarriages. When I opened up and talked about my miscarriages, it was like, oh, whoa, this actually is quite common. So and I think that's another reason why it's good to encourage people to be open about their experiences, because the more open we are, the more the less we feel alone, and the less other people feel like they're the only ones going through a similar experience.
Well, I saw something. I don't remember what it was. I read so many things, but I don't remember if it was an article or just something small, like something short. But it was about miscarriage, and how people just don't really think of it as so traumatic. It's kind of just, oh, it's just a miscarriage. And then kind of towards the end of the article, it was like, but if you ask any woman who's had a miscarriage how old their child would have been, they'll be able to tell you. And it kind of gives me goosebumps, right? Because it's true.
Oh, it's so true. It's so true. And I remember my first miscarriage. I thought that I was really dealing with it quite well, because I hadn't cried, and I think what the actual truth was is I hadn't processed it at all. And once I did, it was really difficult. So I think for any woman out there, and I don't, and obviously it's everyone's miscarriages at different stages of the pregnancy, and no matter what stage, it's really, really difficult.
Well, and it's so easy to say, to minimize your own experience, to say, oh, well, I only miscarried at X weeks. And I know
Yes.
people have miscarried, later on. And who has time for that? If you have a
Yes.
miscarriage, your experience is your experience, and it's still painful. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you need to give yourself time to grieve as well. So for me, I remember just, I felt like I was giving up if I didn't start trying again immediately. But then I realized that I needed time to grieve, and I needed time to like collect myself and get in a mental place where I was ready again to try again and get pregnant.
Well, one of the things that I appreciate more now is that you don't really think about the impact on your body. So your body was making a
Mm,
human being, and for whatever reason, it wasn't successful. And so obviously you miscarry. That is physical, that has a physical impact on your body as well. So not to mention, the impact it has on you emotionally, but physically. And so it's not a bad idea to, as hard as it is, to take a break, if that's what you
absolutely.
want to do. But because of course there's lots of women, myself included, try right after as well. But knowing more now than I did then, it would make sense to
Yes.
give your body a bit of a break because of because of
Absolutely.
the trauma to your body.
Absolutely. That's a really, really great point, Lisa. Because I remember talking to my functional practitioner after I had miscarried, and she said, "Oh, no, no, you know, you really need to wait 3 months because you would have been using up a lot of your nutritional stores in order to start to create the baby. So you really need at least 3 months to be able to build up again your nutritional stores. Same as I think when you do, successfully have a baby, it's best to wait actually a certain amount of time to build up those nutritional stores again.
Yeah, absolutely. I had Sally Fallon on the podcast and from the Weston Price Foundation, and she really spent a bit of time talking about how in traditional cultures you would wait until about 3 years between pregnancies, specifically
Yes.
to allow a woman's body to replenish those nutrients, not only for her benefit, but for when she gets pregnant again, so that the next baby has the benefit of having a mother with a full nutrient store
Yes.
to
Yes.
conceive.
Absolutely.
And that's not something you think
Absolutely.
about, not you, but any of us, because
Yep.
it's just not something that is, it's not on the radar when it comes
It's
to,
not talked about at all.
no.
It's really not. So that's so fantastic that you've gone into detail about that on one of your podcasts because that's I think that's such important information.
Well, and I'd like to delve a little bit more into so your experience with the functional medicine practitioner. So, what inspired you to go that route? What was kind of the kickstarter for you to look into this alternative, quote unquote, medical practitioner?
It was basically because no one else could help me. So I feel like with functional medicine, a lot of people turn to it because a more traditional doctor can't fix your problems. So I had all sorts of health issues at that time and throughout my when I was younger. I had a really bad insomnia. I dealt a lot with anxiety and depression in the past. I had really bad reflux. I there's all sorts of things. I had quite high stress levels. I was really easily stressed. And all of those things were, once I went to a functional practitioner and learned out, were so interconnected. But uh, seeing a more traditional doctor before that, I felt like most of the answers I were given was in the form of a pill. So with my reflux, I was given a pill to stop my body from having an acidic reaction when in fact that's probably my body trying to deal with the underlying causes, which were actually all of my different food allergies. So once I went off all the foods I was allergic to, the reflux went away.
Imagine
And
that.
yeah, it was really life changing for me. Like my doctor, I kind of look at her as a god. She's like on this pedestal because she's the first doctor that would literally sit down with me for hours and listen to every single problem that I have and be like, "Oh yeah, I can fix that." It's like, "You're amazing." So it was I was really on a journey. I think, in a lot of ways, I feel like this 4 year journey of infertility has been a blessing in disguise because I don't think I would be where I am now in terms of health and happiness and personal development if I hadn't been forced to go through this. So it was really dealing with the infertility. I think that was like the final icing on the cake that made me think, okay, I really need to get my health sorted, and went on a search for someone who could do that and ended up meeting this functional practitioner.
Well, and you alluded to some of the changes that you made after under her care,
Yes.
specifically related to the food allergies and things like that. But maybe you could just touch a little bit on some of the other changes that you made and what results, if any, that you actually saw.
Sure. So a big part was obviously my diet. So I said quickly before, but she put me on a very strict diet. So sugar was something I was not allowed to eat ever. And even fruits, I only have about like one serving of fruit a day, if any. And what sort of fruits is normally like a berries or something that's low in sugar. Uh, and let's see what else. And I think with carbs as well. So any sort of carbs that I eat, I only eat a certain amount, and normally those are very nutrient dense carbs like quinoa or sweet potato or what else? Pumpkin. So I try to avoid any sort of low GI carbs or white breads and white rice. and those sorts of things, and mostly just meat and green vegetables. Although, of course, that's probably not what I eat all the time most days, but I try to. So just eating whole foods. Normally when I go through the supermarket now, I just stay on the outside. So you go
Yeah.
through the produce style and through the meat aisle, and that's about it. So not eating anything processed, staying away from sugars, and it's what's fantastic is now there's just so much great information out there online about paleo diets and eating whole foods and eating nutrient rich foods that I feel like it's much easier now than probably when I started even to figure out what sort of recipes to make and what exactly that means by eating nutrient dense foods. So I always encourage people to kind of go online and there's just so much great recipes now that you can find, which makes it a lot easier because it's a real lifestyle change. When I grew up, food wasn't part of what we did. I would eat cereal in the morning because it was quick and easy, and I'd probably eat it for dinner and lunch as well a lot of the time. So I was really not eating well or getting much nutrients at all. So it was a big adjustment for me. It's definitely been a few years getting to a point of where I can comfortably, just learning to cook was one of my hurdles to begin with.
Oh,
But
yes. Yes. I can imagine so. Yeah.
oh yeah, could
'Cause
not cook at all before this. So it's I think it can be quite frustrating in the beginning if someone is looking at changing their diet and trying to eat more whole foods because it takes years to be able to do it. So I think having patience and not getting frustrated in the short term is some advice I can give because that was definitely me in the beginning.
Well, and in your case, it sounds like there was an emphasis on kind of balancing blood sugar because obviously getting rid of the sugar
Definitely.
was a big deal in your situation, especially because of your PCOS diagnosis. I'm assuming that had a lot to do with the direction that your functional
Absolutely.
care practitioner is taking. And
Yes.
that's a big commitment to change your diet in that way. And also, you're not gonna like give up sugar on Tuesday and then on Friday, everything's gonna magically be
Oh
better.
yeah. Oh,
Um,
it's taken me years. I remember I read a book called Sweet Poison by I think it's
oh,
David Gillespie. Have you heard of that book?
I haven't read it
It's
down yet.
um it's a fantastic book, and I remember reading it, and he said in the book that for women it's actually takes a much longer time and it's much more difficult than it is for men. And I was like, oh, that's so typical.
Naturally.
No, of course, it's more difficult. So I really struggle because I grew up in the 80s in America where it was corn syrup was in everything, and I was eating Lucky Charms and all sorts of that was like my staple cereal throughout the day. So it was really, I think, difficult to kind of break that addiction of not having sugar all the time. It's been a very long journey getting there, and sometimes, of course, I relapse. So
Yeah.
I'm definitely not perfect at
Well, I
all.
can relate to that. So you're not alone in that
Okay, good.
sugar addiction thing because I think I've said it many times. Like I definitely still have, but even more so, I used to have like a crazy sweet tooth. Anything sugar candy and whatever. So,
Mm,
um, and the interesting thing is that like it's a specific craving for sugar. It's not like a random craving for anything. It's all like it's a specific carbohydrate craving when you're sitting there with all the sugar.
yes.
And so I've probably mentioned, after doing various dietary changes and having more of a balanced diet, like actually having those macronutrients like fat and protein and carbohydrates,
Yes.
I find that having
Yes.
that balance has kind of curbed, not gotten rid of, but curbed the sugar cravings for me.
Absolutely. Yeah, I noticed that days when I'm not really diligent about eating like a really filling, meal full of, good saturated fats and getting some meat and some veggies in there that I end up craving sugar. So you've got to be on top of it all the time, I think, with eating the right foods in order to not crave the bad foods.
Okay. Well, I want to talk a little bit about your experience with IVF because we kind of went through the journey. But before I do that, I wanted to ask you, after making these changes and addressing the nutrient deficiencies that you identified with your functional practitioner, did you notice a change in your menstrual cycle?
I did. I did, and I couldn't believe it. So for the first time in my life, I started getting kind of regular periods. So I wouldn't say that they were like every 28 days I would get a period, but it was more like every 6 weeks, which for me was amazing. Um, and sometimes 5 weeks. So that was a real miracle for me, being
That's
able
huge.
to get those more regular periods. And, I feel like if I had another 5 years of, eating really well, etc., before trying to get pregnant, they'll probably become even more regular. So
Wow, what
it's
a big
pretty amazing.
difference.
It was amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a huge difference from being very sporadic to
Mm,
actually coming on a semi-regular. Well, it sounds like they're
yes.
regular, but just not, because I know that's why I kind of rag on that term irregular periods, because you can have a regular period that comes every 36 days.
True. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's a really good point. For me it's once in a while though I will get like those get a period like after 2 weeks, which actually just happened to me while I've been trying to do a frozen embryo transfer, which was a bit annoying.
Mm.
But for the most part, yeah, yeah, 5, 6 weeks, which is great.
Hmm. Well, maybe we can talk a little bit about your experience with IVF. How many rounds of IVF? Was it 2 rounds that you did, or?
Yeah, so we've done 2 rounds so far. And the reason we did 2 rounds is we actually could have put a embryo back in on our first round, but my fertility specialist, who I now see, who I just think is so amazing, he actually introduced me to the idea of family planning when you're doing IVF. And I think it really depends on where you are and how much financing IVF. It's obviously really expensive, especially depending on what country you're in. We're quite lucky here in Australia because the Australian government does cover a large portion of the cost through Medicare. So for us, we were able to even kind of consider this option, which is essentially thinking about how many kids you're going to want in the future and doing enough egg collections, and so that you have enough frozen embryos where you can use those in subsequent pregnancies. So for me, I've always really wanted 3 kids. I'm 34 now. I did want to space them apart, especially based on what we were talking about earlier, where I really wanted to build up my nutritional stores again. Also, I think it's probably a lot easier doing if you space them out a little bit.
Yep.
So I was facing this real problem of, it's already taken me 4 years to even try to get pregnant. I'm 34 now. If I want to have 3 kids and space them out, I'm going to be in my early 40s by the time I have my third child. So after talking with my fertility specialist, and he introduced me to this idea of, uh, you know, why don't you do maybe a couple cycles and you can actually store up how many embryos that you have so that you can use those then for your second and third pregnancy. Because he said, look, getting you pregnant the first time, obviously that's not a problem. It's more the second and the third child that you really need to worry about when you are older and, age-related fertility decline. It's obviously your egg quality is going to start to be quite affected after age 35. So we ended
Hmm.
up doing more than one cycle for that reason. We did actually not have a very successful first cycle anyways. There was a problem with fertilization. So uh, we started off with actually 44 eggs, which is crazy.
Oh my
So
goodness.
having yeah, oh, it was really awful. It was really difficult. I couldn't walk for like the week before the egg retrieval and about a week afterwards because my ovaries were just so bloated and obviously very overstimulated, which
Wow.
is very common with women with PCOS. Is you actually have to be quite careful that you don't overstimulate the ovaries and get too many eggs. But then with those 44 eggs, only a very small amount actually fertilized. So there's obviously an additional problem that we didn't know about, which was that for some reason, my husband's sperm and my eggs didn't like each other very much, and there was some sort of fertilization issue there.
Oh no.
But even with this small amount, we could have tried to do a transfer, but we decided to go ahead and do a second cycle and collect more eggs in order to have kind of a store of frozen embryos for the future.
Mm.
So that was the 2 cycles that we did. The second cycle was a lot better. We were monitored, and I didn't ovulate as many eggs as the first time. And we actually ended up doing ICSI the second time in order to ensure that more eggs got fertilized. So I don't know if you talked about ICSI before on your show.
In one of the episodes, and that's where they actually like do the thing where this is real scientific for everyone listening, because I clearly am a doctor. Do the thing where they take the sperm and they put it directly into the egg itself. Is that what it is? Okay.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So when you have fertilization problems like we did, or a lot of times I think when you don't have much sperm to work with, if there's a male factor infertility problem, ICSI is a great solution, because you actually, I think you wash the sperm first, so you kind of can pick out the strongest ones, and then you actually manually put the sperm into the egg and fertilize it that way. So that was fantastic for us, because we had a much better result with ICSI, we had a lot more eggs fertilized, which was fantastic. So now we're actually just starting a frozen embryo cycle where we'll actually put one in.
Okay. Well, I wish you the best of luck with your cycle.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Try not to get my hopes up. It's quite interesting. I mean, I know we haven't talked much about the emotional processing that goes through after years of dealing with infertility, but it's quite interesting. I've really, I feel like, gotten to a point where I've let go of that need to be in control, which for me is amazing, because I'm like a control freak, like such a control freak. So it's been an interesting process for me, and it required a lot of personal development to kind of get to a point where I'm feeling very patient, and like, what's going to happen is going to happen. But I guess you can say there's most days I feel like that. Obviously I have days where I don't, but I feel like emotionally I'm in a much better place now, where, we'll just, whether or not this is successful or not, we'll get there eventually.
Well, that's one of the things that I even mentioned at the beginning of the podcast when I was reading through your blog, and after you had reached out to me, it just struck me how positive kind of your whole attitude and your whole, I mean, this is not a necessarily a positive situation, right? It depends on how you react to it. And even you mentioned that, you've learned so much from this obviously difficult process. And I find that to be just very inspiring. And I think it will help a lot of women, give hope to a lot of women as well. I'm sure obviously you're a human being, so it's not like every single day you're on cloud nine.
No.
Given this, every single day I'm dancing in the sunshine with the butterflies and the roses. So
life is beautiful all the time. No, that's not
100% of the time. But you know what I mean. It's inspiring
overall,
that you've managed to maintain that hope and that positive. Because I mean, what else can you do, right?
That's right. And and it's really like, I've got complete control, I guess, over my own happiness and how this is going to affect me. So it's taken a long time to get to a place where I've, think this way, but I'm determined to live each day, whether or not I have a baby or am pregnant, and enjoy my life, and try to make the most of it. And obviously that wasn't something that I originally felt, or it was a very long time getting to this point. So if people don't feel that way, I don't think they should beat themselves up about it, because it's not it takes a long time, I feel like, to get to a place where you can look at your experiences that way. And a lot of good things that have happened along the way that probably wouldn't have happened if we had a baby. Like, we've moved and built a beautiful house, and I've started this website, and so there's a lot of great things that have happened from it taking a bit longer than I originally thought it would.
Well, and you talk about this in one of the articles on your blog. So I really like the article 14 Tips for Dealing with Infertility. So And I'll link that into in the show notes page. And I don't, want you to like list them all right now, but because that would be silly when you could just go read the article. But what are some of the things that you've kind of learned on your journey that have helped you to get to this place and have helped you to
Yep.
cope with your fertility challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most important things is to take the time to educate yourself about, go and try to find quality information, infertility information online, and try to become as knowledgeable as you can about, what your own condition is and what your choices are and what the different types of ways you can treat your condition, et cetera. Because I think that really puts a lot of control back into your hands, and it can give you a lot more confidence that you are making the right decisions, because it's such a confusing and huge topic, and I feel like there's not a ton of great online information out there. So I think taking the time to really to search and find that information, for me at least, that put a lot of control back into my hands and gave me a lot of confidence that I knew at least I was doing everything that I could to get pregnant. So that's probably one of my biggest tips, and one of the reasons why I started my blog, smartfertilitychoices.com, is it's really hard to find that quality information, and I think it's so good if when you do find it, I've heard a lot from a lot of people in my audience that it just gives them a lot of hope as well, I think. And also, I mean, we've kind of talked about this before, but I think that it's really important to be as open as you can about your journey and what you're going through, because the more open you are to friends and family, the more of a support system you're going to have when things don't go so well. So, for example, like, I think a lot of people wait until after 12 weeks when they get pregnant to let people know in
Mm-hmm.
case they miscarry, etc. But I personally made the decision to tell my close friends and family, because I actually really wanted them to be there and have someone to talk to if it did happen, and it did, but twice, and both times I was actually quite thankful, because uh, I felt like I had a really great support network. And again, I think it really depends on the person and how comfortable you are with that. But um, the people that I've encouraged to open up about their journey, I feel like they've um, been in a much better place as far as the support system goes when they have done that. Um, and probably another important one is to not settle with any specialist that you're seeing. So I think really stick with your intuition and your gut, and if you aren't happy with your specialist, or you don't think they're doing the best job that they could, don't be scared to, uh, go and try to find someone else. And we've got to be, um, as consumers, reproductive medicine, it is a consumer product. We need to educate ourselves about it and be able to shop around and find someone that we really think is going to do the best that they can for us. So I
Absolutely.
think that's probably my top tips.
Mhm. Well, one of the questions that I tend to ask when I have done interviews around infertility challenges is, so for the support people, the people in your life who maybe aren't going through fertility challenges and who just keep getting pregnant without even trying, um, and and you're supporting a friend who's having fertility challenges.
Mhm.
I had a conversation with one of my friends who is pregnant with her fourth baby, and her and her husband weren't even trying. I think they probably had sex like once. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those
Yeah,
situations that,
happens
like,
all the time.
right? And so
You're
you're
like, how
going
does
through,
that happen?
yeah. And also we were having this conversation because one of her really close friends is going through fertility challenges and having a hard time. Like, she was really just kind of beside herself. Like, how do I tell her that I got pregnant again, type of thing,
Mm,
right?
yes.
Um, just like that. So
Mm.
for the flip side, for the friend who's trying to be supportive, what are some of your suggestions, or just FYIs that
Mm.
that you would like to have everyone to know?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard one, because I think it really depends on the person as well. But I think, a lot of it's common sense, really. It's, you need to, obviously it's a natural feeling. And I don't think people, don't beat yourself up about this, but it is a natural feeling to feel jealous or feel like, why not me? So if you do have a friend that's going through infertility, obviously being aware of that and trying to be as considerate of the feelings that they're going through as possible. And just being, I think a lot of times we try to give advice, but it may not be the advice that they need. So instead, I think just being someone being a good ear, so, being able to be that person that can listen. And because sometimes I feel like giving advice may not always be what they need to hear. So I think just trying to let people know that you're there for them if they need someone to talk to. And in that situation, if someone like in the situation you were talking about, I think, obviously you have the right to be happy and to share your news. And I think it should be wonderful. And it's up to that other person to deal with it how they can, but just letting them know that you're there for them and you know what they're going through is really difficult.
Well, and see, this is something that I would think. So let me know what you think about this. But I feel like, given that we're all adults here, I think that there would be something to be said for acknowledging the fact, like you said, that person may have whatever feelings they are having at that time, and maybe they need a little bit of space, and
Yes.
maybe you need to respect that.
Yeah, and not taking it personally, because it really doesn't have anything to do with you. It's actually what they're going through. So I think being able to be conscious of that and not take it personally is important.
But that's easier said than done, because
It
of
is.
course
Oh,
we all
yes.
have feelings. So
Yes, that's right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, to switch gears a little bit before we get to the end of our interview, there was another article that you wrote that was really interesting, and it was called Taking Charge of Your Fertility. And one of the things that you talked about in that article was the media and how there's always pictures of all these women in their 40s, 47-year-old so-and-so, is pregnant with twins and all those types of things. And this is a topic that I have discussed on a few of my podcast episodes. And so from your experiences over the years, what would you say that women should know about that whole topic of all these women getting pregnant in their late 40s in the media, but also for women who are waiting to conceive, waiting for everything to line up perfectly, so waiting to conceive in their, late 30s and 40s?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be difficult. So I think it's about age 35 is when you start to see like a very steep drop in egg quality, unfortunately. And I can't, say this in the article, but you can feel as really, really healthy and you can look fantastic and look really young, but unfortunately, that's not going to translate into what your eggs are doing, because biologically, we are made in this way where after age 35, there does start to be a really steep drop in egg quality. So it was quite interesting. I did like put together an IVF success rate calculator based on some data from Australia New Zealand database, and the success rates with IVF after age 40 was like only about I don't remember off the top of my head, but very, very low, like 10% or lower than that. So I feel like people think that IVF is like this kind of safety net, or this if I'm age 40 and I'm still not ready yet to, and then I'm ready to have kids at age 40 or 41, well, I can just do IVF and then it'll be fine. But it's IVF is actually, unfortunately it's not a safety net for us, because it's really dependent on the egg quality, and there's not much you can do about egg quality when you're doing IVF. So, when I see these magazines and I see all of these women who are getting pregnant at these older ages, the reality of the story is that it's probably an egg donation. And what's really unfortunate is that they're not open about that, because I feel like it gives off this false sense of security for people because we see this in our face all the time about these, much older women getting pregnant, but we're not actually hearing the full story. And if we did, we'd probably make different decisions along the way about when we decide to get pregnant, start trying to get pregnant.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not sure if it was in one of the articles that you wrote that I read or in one of the podcast episodes of yours that I listened to, but you did make a distinction between pregnancy success rates and live birth rates. And I wanted you to touch on that a little bit.
Yep. Yeah. So one of the subjects that I'm quite passionate about, that I've been learning a lot about, is, and this happened when I started doing IVF, is learning about success rates, and also what I found is that they're actually really misleading. So, going on to different fertility clinics and looking at their success rates, it's very, very confusing about what those success rates actually are. So, one of the common things that I found is that most people post their success rates based on pregnancy rates. But as I would know, and as a lot of people would know, you can successfully get pregnant, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to result in a live birth. So one of the articles that I've wrote is talking about kind of those caveats and what to look out for. So when you're looking at success rates, it's more important that you actually look at the live birth success rates versus the pregnancy success rates, because ultimately, what we're hoping for is to actually have a baby and not just get pregnant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that really, I guess it just kind of, it triggered something for me in the sense that that's so misleading.
It's really misleading.
If you're going to say, the success rate is whatever percentage, knowing fully well that a certain percentage of those pregnancies end in miscarriage. So I think that's something that's really important for all women to know especially when they're, embarking into that IVF assisted reproductive technology world, because I have personally not had to go through that myself. And so just as someone kind of on the outside, there's a ton of things I have no idea about. When you have friends that are going through fertility challenges, you get a window into the world of, injections and the repeated ultrasounds and those types of things. But until you really go through that experience, or, until you enter into that world, you have no idea.
That's right. That's right. And it's really hard to find good information on it as well. I feel like especially when it comes to success rates, because there's these are obviously big companies that are they're businesses, and they're commercially driven. So as a consumer, we really have to learn how to interpret the information that we're given in order to prepare ourselves for financially, how much it may cost us. And part of that is trying to figure out what your success rates are going to be like in order to, I think, have a realistic view about what may potentially happen.
Well, and I think that, we touched a little bit on kind of the financial aspects even before we started recording today. But I think that the success rate conversation, the financial aspect conversation go together, because we have to be hopeful if we're going to embark on this type of journey. And I think if you're going to spend, I don't know how much these things cost in Australia or in the US, but and I don't know specifically how much they cost in Canada either, but from what I've heard and all those types of things, it can range, right? And 10,000, 15,000, I don't know. It's a lot of money though. And so
it's a lot of money.
if I were to spend, say, somewhere between $10,000 and $15,000 on a procedure, there would definitely be a huge part of me that would assume it would work. And so,
Yes.
that added stress of, and also needing to have that realistic understanding of what the success rates are, what to expect. Obviously, that doesn't mean that you're not going to go through the emotions and experience it no matter what happens. But you don't want to go into it thinking that, oh, well, of course this is going to work. And on the first try, you want to, I think that the fertility, the success rate calculator that you've created is a good start, I guess, in really getting this idea out there that we need to know what we're getting into here.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Like there was one woman who emailed me, and she had spent $80,000 so far on their journey. They had to mortgage their house. They were living off of credit cards, in the hopes of getting pregnant. So it's really life altering, and you can end up spending so much money. And obviously it depends on the country. Like I was saying, here in Australia, we're quite lucky because the Australian government does cover a large portion of it. But I know in the United States, it's very, very different. And a lot of insurance companies, depending on the state that you're in, don't even have to cover it. So it can end up just costing an absolute fortune. So I feel like obviously it's not going to fix the problem but at least I feel like educating yourself on your success rates, on maybe creating a budget and having being able to understand what the potential amount you're going to spend, etc. At least you're in a better place than you would be if you hadn't.
Yeah, hadn't considered those things.
Yes, yeah.
All right. Well, to wrap up our show today, I just have a few questions to close it out. And so the first question is, what would you say is the most important thing that a woman should know when she's trying to get pregnant?
That's a tough question. I would say one of the most important things that I've learned is self-care. So if you're trying to get pregnant, make sure to just really look after yourself. Like, I feel like as women, we can be so self-sacrificing and we can take a lot of guilt onto ourselves. So within that process of trying to get pregnant and if it's becoming difficult, I think being able to prioritize yourself, look after yourself, try to de-stress as much as possible, take as much off your plate as you possibly can, and if you are having problems, know that this isn't your fault and try to take away as much of that guilt as possible. And I feel like then you're in such a better mental space to be able to kind of continue on your journey of trying to get pregnant.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say is the biggest myth about fertility in general that you'd like to see corrected?
Well, I think the one that we were just talking about, as far as that, just because celebrities are getting pregnant at the age of 45 doesn't necessarily mean that that's a consistent reality for everybody, and that there may be more behind that story than you know about.
Okay. And last question. So for a woman who's listening who may be currently on some sort of hormonal contraceptive, she doesn't really want to get pregnant right now, but she's thinking about getting pregnant in the next 2 to 3 years. What advice, if any, would you give to her?
Well, I think it is quite important to have at least a year or two. I mean, you may know better than I do about this, but of actually being off the pill prior to trying to get pregnant. So if it is something you're thinking about in the next couple of years, it is probably worth considering taking yourself off the pill so that you can kind of get your body back in balance in preparation for pregnancy.
Great. Well, Kym, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate you for taking the time to share your experience and your wisdom with the audience. It was really nice chatting with you about these topics. And I just really think that this episode will benefit so many women who are going through fertility challenges. And so why don't you take a minute to talk a little bit about your website, your podcast, and tell the listeners where they can find out more about you and contact you.
Sure. Thanks, Lisa. So my blog or website is called smartfertilitychoices.com. And I'm also launching a podcast probably in a couple months' time, which will just be the Smart Fertility Choices podcast. And it's essentially a space that I've tried to create where you can go and get some good quality information that's unbiased, which I think is really important. So on my blog, I do talk a lot about IVF success rates, and we also have stories from women also going through infertility, and one of the things that I feel like isn't really talked about enough is actually this emotional support and the mental side of dealing with infertility. So it's kind of my mission to research and come up with as many emotionally supporting options as possible that can kind of help you along your journey and that emotional side, because I feel like that's just such a huge part of dealing with infertility is actually the emotional side of it. So I talk a lot about mindfulness and mindfulness meditation, and want to interview some psychologists as well about maybe some different CBT and ACT, and just to give people some more support and more avenues that they can take to kind of get themselves in a better mental space when going through this.
Well,
So
I can't wait to see what you do in that area, because it's one of the topics that I love to talk about, the emotional impact of fertility, and also that whole side of the whole side of fertility that we don't really fully understand, the aspects. So I'm really excited to see what you do in that area.
Oh, thanks, Lisa. Yeah. It's it'll be good for me as well.
Yeah, of course.
That's the great thing about all of this, I guess, is you're learning for yourself as well.
Yeah, I learn from every guest, and I just it's my absolute pleasure and honor, and and it's so much fun for me. So I absolutely love all of the things that I've been able to learn from all of my guests. So thanks again, Kym.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Lisa.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode, so head over to the show notes page and let me know what you found most helpful or most interesting from today's show. So you'll find the show notes for today's episode at fertilityfriday.com/52, so the number 52. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/fertilityfridays with an S, on Twitter at fertilefriday. And if you enjoyed what you heard today and you're wanting to learn more about the fertility awareness method, then join the conversation and come over to fertilityfriday.com/community, and you'll be redirected to the Fertility Friday Fertility Awareness Facebook group. If you've been enjoying the podcast, please look for it on iTunes and leave a 5-star review so that more people can find it. And also, if you have an idea for a podcast episode or a guest suggestion, you can shoot me an email at info@fertilityfriday.com. I appreciate all of you for taking the time to tune into the podcast, whether you're on the go or on the way to work or just going for a jog or whatever it is. Thank you for listening today and supporting the show. And as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.